people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Shaz the Chadallo.
This week, with just 14 days until the polls close, what will Donald Trump still do to try and win, and what will he do if he loses? We'll ask his niece, Mary Trump.
We're also going to take a look at the Hunter Biden email story, as well as the latest polls. It's getting pretty crazy out there.
President Trump has been campaigning hard this week in states that he won narrowly in 2016, but where polls show now he's trailing Joe Biden. He's also making a play for Nevada, which Democrats won last time, and he had this warning for the people of Carson City.
Carson City will become a ghost town. If he comes in, Carson City will become a ghost town.
And even worse than that,
the Christmas season will be canceled.
Scary stuff. The president also held a series of rallies in Arizona, where he now trails Joe Biden by 3 points after winning by 3.5 4 years ago. It was there that he accused the media of playing up the risk of coronavirus.
COVID, pandemic, COVID. You know why? They're trying to talk everybody out of voting. People aren't buying at CNN, you dumb bastards. They're not buying it.
Meanwhile, President Trump's post-rally dance moves have become a thing on TikTok. Although the presidential moves have been compared unfavourably to Elaine from Seinfeld. What's wrong with that? Former Secretary of State John Kerry tweeted this week, "And you people called me lurch?" Oh yeah, I can see that. But with last week's second presidential debate called off, Trump and Biden appeared in simultaneous but separate town hall events. Just over 14 million viewers tuned in to see Joe Biden on America's ABC. Just under 11 million watched Trump on NBC. Almost 2 million more watched Trump simulcast on the cable channel MSNBC, and 700,000 more watched Trump on the business channel CNBC. Add it all up, a total of 13.5 million, so a narrow ratings win for Joe Biden there.
Yeah, and Biden's banking that minor win and heading home. He's been off the campaign trail since Monday through to Thursday night's debate. Sadly, that's become par for the course. Biden's answered less than half as many questions from the press as Trump has, 365 to 753, at least according to the Trump campaign, including an almost 3-month stretch where he took no questions from the press pack. But it hasn't stopped the early votes from pouring in. There have been 31 million votes so far. That's over 22% of the total turnout in 2016. And of the states that report party registrations, over 53% of the registrations have been Democrats, compared to 25% that have been Republicans. This matches up with YouGov's poll nicely that found 19% of registered voters said they had already voted, 28% of Biden supporters have already voted, and 15% of Trump supporters have already voted. That's kind of what we expected from the last few months of polls about early voting. As far as states go, Vermont, Texas and New Jersey have already seen over 40% of their 2016 total vote turnout. And most of the major swing states are at around 30% of 2016 levels already. That turnout is looking like it could be enormous, John.
Yeah, it certainly does. On the stump this week, though, as much as he was, former Vice President Joe Biden continued to hammer the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic, including another one of these drive-in rallies. This one was held in North Carolina.
On Friday, we saw the highest number of new cases in one day since July. In the last 2 days, worst day since July. Yet, the other night, Trump said at one of his rallies, "We've turned the corner." And my grandfather would say, "This guy's gone around the bend if he thinks we turned the corner."
And while he's doing his debate prep, Joe Biden's wheeling out the big gun surrogates. Barack Obama held a drive-in rally for Biden in Pennsylvania earlier today, the first time that he has stumped for his former Veep.
Yep, and we're going to be talking a lot more about the COVID thing on Friday's Fireside Chat. Suffice to say, it seems like another wave is building. These are the 30 states currently classified as experiencing uncontrolled COVID spread. That is not good timing for Trump.
No, indeed. Now to how the polls are looking and also how the money is looking, because Joe Biden's bean counters announced this week that the former VP has a thumping cash advantage over President Trump in the final month of this campaign. In September, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party raised a record $383 million, overshadowing Trump and the RNC's otherwise pretty impressive haul of $248 million. But what's worse for the president, he was already nearly broke. It gives him a total of just $251.4 million just to splash between now and the election. But that compares to Joe Biden's $432 million. It's a little bit like that old movie, Chaz.
You have 30 days in which to spend
$432
million. He can't
become president
unless he can spend it.
I think we should consider the possibility of psychiatric help.
Biden's
Millions. Coming soon.
I think that's a knockoff. President Trump, meanwhile, he vowed last month to spend whatever it takes of his own money to win, but so far there is not much evidence of that. This week he said he could raise a lot more money from Wall Street, but he doesn't like to have strings attached.
I would raise $1 billion in one day if I wanted to. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it.
Since June, Biden and his backers have spent over $720 million on TV ads alone, compared to Trump's $450 million. Biden is spending almost twice as much on national ads, while Trump's more targeted approach has seen him really banking on digital advertising. That $174 million of Trump's digital spend better pay off. They spent $350 million on a data operation to find out who to target those digital ads to. We'll find out soon whether that was money well spent, Chaz.
Yeah, and just to put all that money in context, by the way, Hillary spent $768 million for her whole campaign in 2016. Biden will do that in about 7 weeks. And Trump's whole campaign in 2016 cost less than Biden has in the bank right now. And that's just the presidential money. Then there's Act Blue, which is the platform for small online donors for Democratic congressional candidates. They've raised $1.5 billion this quarter alone to the Republicans' equivalent platform that has raised $620 million. This is why 7 of the 10 most expensive Senate races ever are happening right now. And of the top 14 races, Democrats have raised more than twice as much as Republicans have, $363 million to $143 million just for this last quarter. So what do you do with all that money? Well, the most expensive race ever by some way is the South Carolina Senate race between Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison. Harrison has raised $57 million this quarter alone and is using some of it to go after third-party candidate Bill Bledsoe, a man who dropped out and endorsed Lindsey Graham 2 weeks ago. So why is Harrison attacking him? Because he's still on the ballot. And in recent polls, Harrison and Graham are neck and neck, while Bledsoe is drawing 3% support. That could be enough to sink Graham. So Harrison is hoping to encourage Conservatives to vote for Bledsoe instead of Lindsey Graham with some pretty transparent reverse psychology. Enjoy.
I'm Jamie Harrison, and I approve this message. Before you vote, know who's on the ballot. Lindsey Graham's changed after 25 years in Washington and millions from special interests. But beware, right-wing Constitution Party candidate Dr. Bill Bledsoe is also on the ballot. Bledsoe opposes all abortions, and Bledsoe supported Trump from day one. Bledsoe believes any gun control law infringes upon the Second Amendment. No restrictions on guns, pro-Trump from day one. Bledsoe's too conservative for South Carolina.
You gotta respect the quality troll, John.
Sneaky, very sneaky. Now, let's have a look at the polls. The national surveys have tightened a little this week, down from an average of 10 points to Joe Biden last week to just under 9 today. And the battleground states are closer, but those numbers have hardly shifted in a month.
And the bad news for Trump is that since 1972, there's only been one election where the polls have shifted more than 3.1 points in the final 15 days. That was a 7-point shift in 1992. That 3.1 point shift, by the way, was before the last election. But Trump really needs a whole lot more movement than that. The good news for Trump, though, is that the Shy Trumper polling company, Trafalgar, is now projecting that Trump will win. Trafalgar's projecting a very narrow electoral college victory win in the 270s to 280s. Basically, he thinks Trump will lose Wisconsin, maybe lose Pennsylvania, but that will still be enough for him to sneak home. Well, Trafalgar was right in 2016, so let's see.
Yeah, indeed. Well, with most polls at least showing that Donald Trump is unlikely to win a second term on November 3, how would he be feeling now? What can we expect, particularly if he loses? Will he refuse to accept defeat if it comes? His niece, Mary Trump, is a psychologist and author of the book Too Much and Never Enough. Recently, she's made a career out of trying to figure out her famous uncle. Dr. Mary Trump, welcome to Planet America.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Knowing your uncle as you do, how do you think he's feeling right now? He had a brush with COVID, he's down significantly in the polls, yet there he is dancing after his rallies. What's going on in his mind?
First of all, I do not concede that that's dancing. But that aside, one of the worst things that could have happened is for Donald to get COVID and then have a mild to moderate case that he recovered from quickly, because it would encourage him to continue to downplay it and give the American people the message that all you needed to do to beat it was to be tough like he is, which is very dangerous, and that is indeed what he's done. But that's entirely separate from the other crises he's facing. I think he's pretty desperate. I think we've seen that in his debate performance with Vice President Biden. We saw it the other night with his town hall performance with Savannah Guthrie. And I think the nonstop rallies, which, by the way, are being mostly held in states that are on fire with COVID infections, is another sign of that. It's like a power play for him. But we need to remember that he is putting thousands of people at risk whenever he holds a rally.
Mary, it's hard to know sometimes whether the president is insecure or overconfident, or both. What do you think?
He's incredibly insecure. I think the best way to understand Donald is that underneath all of it, he's a terrified little boy. And everything he does is to overcompensate for that fact.
If he does lose this election in 2 weeks, does that have a crushing effect on his ego, on his sense of self, or does he go into full rejection mode and refuse to accept the result?
It depends on the margin of a Biden victory. If it's a landslide, Donald will be deeply narcissistically wounded. However, I think he's constitutionally incapable of accepting that. So he'll pivot away from the injury by pretending that he was the best thing that ever happened to this country. We don't deserve him. And he's going to go and do something really important, like build Trump Tower in Moscow or something. If it's close, that's a little bit more tricky, because we need to remember that Donald has a lot of enablers, and many of the people closest to him are benefiting enormously by the position he holds in the Oval Office. And they will, if it's close, or if we don't get the election results right away, will encourage him to stay and fight. And that would be devastating for our country.
Mary, even now, 5 years on, people still don't know how to deal with Donald Trump when he's on attack, say on Twitter or at one of his rallies. What would you suggest they do?
The first thing I would say to them is stop affording him the respect that is due the office of the presidency. Because nobody in the history of my country has done more to disrespect the office of the presidency than Donald Trump. So treat him like a candidate. He's a candidate for the presidency right now. He should not be afforded any special privileges. And just based on his abhorrent behavior, he doesn't need any other advantages. I mean, seriously, like, he disrespects reporters on a daily basis, and yet they call him sir. You know, he puts reporters at risk. You know, I know some journalists who fear for their lives when covering Donald's rallies because of how he stirs up the rally goers against the media. So, you know, just stop it. Treat him like the thug he is, quite honestly. And the other thing I'd say is Donald is the weakest person I've ever met in my life. stop treating him like he's the tough guy he pretends to be.
We're into the final fortnight. We've got a debate at the end of this week. What do you think President Trump is capable of doing in that period of time? Is he going to be looking for another October surprise, some way of salvaging his reputation and his presidency?
Yeah, of course, because even Donald is aware that if things don't go well for him in November, he is very likely facing state charges which cannot be pardoned. So he's going to do anything he can to make sure he stays in the Oval Office. Donald has been actively cheating in this election for a couple of months now. He cheats when he tells people in the middle of a deadly pandemic that they can't trust the post office. He's cheating when he tells his followers that if Joe Biden wins, the election will have been rigged and they should not accept the results. He's cheating when he tells his armed followers to show up at polling places to make sure no fraud is committed. Because, by the way, that's voter intimidation. So it's already happening. And nobody should be deceived into thinking that the worst is over.
Mary Trump, we really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate it.
And speaking of family matters, this week, associates of President Trump handed the tabloid New York Post what they claimed was a smoking gun, proving Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter were up to no good in Ukraine during the Obama administration. After a 2-year mission looking for dirt on the Bidens, which included getting Trump impeached for exerting improper pressure on Ukraine to meddle in the election, the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, now thinks he's got the goods.
There will be every effort to censor, block, and stop you from hearing this information from the social media, from the Democrats, and tragically, from most of your networks that have, for over 2 years, been covering up crimes at the highest levels.
Well, Rudy was kind of right about the first bit, at least. The Post story was widely criticised for reporting unverified information, possibly hacked material or just Russian disinformation. Twitter and Facebook blocked links to it, helping to fuel a sense that there was a cover-up going on. Rival newspaper, the New York Times, reported that some of the Post's reporters withheld their bylines and questioned the credibility of their own article. The Post story contained an email which may or may not be authentic and other content, including, allegedly, photos and videos of Hunter Biden from as many as 3 laptops, which somehow found their way into Rudy's hands via, he claims, a Delaware computer repair shop owner. The key email, though, which lacks identifying metadata, suggests the younger Biden had offered to broker a meeting between an executive of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company he served on the board of, and his father. Joe Biden has denied any meeting took place, just as he has denied ever talking about Burisma with Hunter. Vice President Biden has also denied that he pressured Ukraine to sack a prosecutor investigating Burisma to protect Hunter. The prosecutor was sacked, he says, because the US, the EU and the IMF all thought that prosecutor was himself corrupt. There are some big gaps still in Rudy's version of this story, not just in proving any meeting took place, but also that Joe Biden did anything corrupt. So it's more a whiff of smoke than a fire, and it certainly does not appear to be a smoking gun. But former Trump strategist Steve Bannon, who is currently under indictment himself for an alleged border wall funding scam, he tipped off the Post to this story and is now threatening there's a lot more to come.
You're going to be buried in an avalanche of evidence of your corruption and how you've sold out America. You sold out America to the equivalent of the Nazi Party in the 1930s.
Looking good, Steve. Other Trump allies, like Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, are also speculating there may be child pornography on one of the computers and that Joe Biden was taking a cut from other business deals that Hunter and even other members of the Biden family were doing.
Some of these emails indicate that Joe Biden was fully aware of this. He was taking his 10% cut or requiring 50% from his family member's salary. This needs to be known before Americans go to the polls.
Meanwhile, the Washington Post this week, Chaz, reported that the White House was warned last year Rudy Giuliani was the target of an influence operation by Russian intelligence to feed Russian misinformation directly to President Trump. We do not yet know if this is an example of that or not.
We don't, although the Director for National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, has denied it.
Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. It's simply not true.
On the other hand, Ratcliffe hasn't exactly been the most reliable source of information recently. And it's noteworthy that not only is no one agreeing to share the laptop's contents with other newspapers or even Hunter Biden's lawyers to verify it, but they aren't even sharing the metadata, details or context of any of the emails in question. For Team Biden's part, while they said the meeting with that Burisma guy wasn't on Biden's official schedule, they wouldn't rule out the possibility that Biden might have had an informal interaction with him, albeit a cursory one. They also haven't said a word about whether they believe the emails are authentic. This is Joe's total comment to date.
And Mr. Biden, what is your response to the New York Post story about your son, sir?
I know you'd ask it. I have no response. It's another smear campaign. Right up your alley. They're the questions you always ask.
A bit Trumpy, that response. And in an especially cheeky turn, the Biden campaign suggested the emails must be fake because Twitter and Facebook censored them.
What is your campaign response to this article, and do you think that Twitter is doing the right thing here?
Well, look, I think Twitter's response to the actual article itself makes clear that these, purported allegations are false and they're not true.
But we know at least some of the emails seem true because Fox News authenticated one of them through its recipients.
From May 2017, correspondence with Chinese energy executives about remuneration packages, which two sources have verified to Fox News. It discusses payment for 6 people, including a reference to 10% of the equity in the deal be held by H for the big guy. Sources tell Fox News the big guy is Joe Biden, noting this was after he left office.
Now that last bit is important because that's how most of these emails seem to be going. They either indicate Hunter trading off his dad's name, which we already knew, or they indicate Joe getting a slice of the action after he left office. But as John said, no smoking gun of corruption while he was in office. Now, some people have ignored the difference between in office and out of office. They've also pretended that the Ukrainian prosecutor that Biden forced out was actually investigating Burisma, like this bit at the top of the New York Post laptop story. Less than a year before the elder Biden pressured officials in Ukraine into firing a prosecutor who was investigating the company. But that is an assertion which no one is even trying to back up, and there are plenty of independent parties from the time saying it isn't true. And then there's this kind of thing.
But the question remains, how has Joe Biden lived in extravagance all these years on a government salary? No one has ever answered that question.
Let me try, Tucker. Extravagance on a government salary, you say? You mean like in 2015 when Biden's estimated net worth was minus $950,000? Or when he left office in 2017 and his assets and liabilities were both in the same ballpark? Is that the kind of extravagance you're talking about? Because I would expect that from a government salary. But even if the case against Joe Biden isn't clear, the case against social media is much more straightforward. According to Facebook, they had signals that all this content was false. What signals were they? They won't say. But that's why they reduced the story's distribution pending review by a third-party fact-checker. This mysterious fact-checker, healthfeedback.org, which has no point of contact and lists no email addresses on its website. Not perfect transparency there, I'd suggest. Meanwhile, Twitter first said they'd block links to the New York Post article because they were potentially harmful, whatever that means. And then Twitter said they blocked the article because one of the pictures contained personal and private information, Hunter Biden's email address. Then they also said it was because Twitter prohibits the distribution of content obtained without authorization. What, like Trump's tax returns in the New York Times? What rubbish! I haven't seen this much junk online since I last chatted to Jeffrey Truman. Look it up. Although, apparently Twitter has already changed their processes to now simply issuing warnings, not blocking articles and not shutting down the accounts of people who tweet out links, like the New York Post, whose Twitter account is still not unlocked. But were Twitter and Facebook being partisan? Rudy Giuliani has an alternative explanation. He says, my guess is that George Soros is behind this counter-offensive because he wants to create a socialist country. He'd like to see us collapse and see us taken over by the international whatever. I see. Thanks for the contribution, Rudy, as always.
Well, 2 weeks out now from the presidential election, and the polls are consistently pointing towards an easy victory for Joe Biden. But what if those polls and the expectations based on those polls are just out of whack? Well, it has happened before. It's one of the most iconic images in American political history. A delighted President Harry Truman holds up the front page of the Chicago Daily Tribune from November 3rd, 1948. Dewey defeats Truman. Truman's delighted because the Tribune's early edition on the morning after the election was wrong. In fact, the Democratic incumbent had defeated his Republican challenger, Tom Dewey. The fledgling medium of television, though, had got it right.
The final Truman-Barkley total will reach and exceed 279 electoral votes.
But the reason some newspapers stuffed it up is interesting. There was a printers' strike, which meant that papers like the Tribune took longer to produce each day. Editors gambled on the result based on polls which showed Dewey in the lead. Late on election night, they rolled the presses, and by the time counting showed a closer race, 150,000 copies were already on their way to newsstands. The snafu was all the sweeter for Truman because the Tribune was very pro-Republican. In an editorial, they'd called him a nincompoop. Harry had the last laugh. But the Chicago Tribune wasn't alone. A conventional wisdom had emerged in 1948 that Dewey was going to win, and for pretty good reasons. Harry Truman had become president in the final weeks of World War II after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, but when the guns fell silent and the last confetti from the victory parades had been swept away, it soon became clear that the peace was fragile. America's wartime alliance with the Soviet Union had papered over a deep ideological rivalry, and as an iron curtain descended across Europe, a red scare spread across America. Truman's Democrats were trounced in the 1946 midterms, and the president's approval rating crashed from 87% to just 34% in barely a year. By 1948, Truman was struggling to hold on to his party's nomination. Some Democrats tried to recruit General Dwight Eisenhower as their candidate. He declined, only to run and win as a Republican 4 years later. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party itself was falling apart. Former Vice President Henry Wallace wanted a softer line on communism and split to form the left-wing Progressive Party. At the Democratic Convention, remaining Liberals, led by future VP Hubert Humphrey, inserted a strong civil rights plank in the party platform. That led to a walkout by some Southern segregationists who formed the States' Rights, or Dixiecrat Party, with Governor Strom Thurmond of South Carolina as their presidential nominee. With defections from his party's left and right, Harry Truman was in trouble. Meanwhile, the Republican governor of New York, Thomas Dewey, who'd lost to Roosevelt in 1944, was again their nominee. And he looked to be cruising to the White House.
I thank you with all my heart for your friendship and your confidence.
The Gallup poll showed Dewey leading Truman by 17 points 2 months out from the election. Some pollsters decided it was all over and simply stopped polling. Dewey, meanwhile, played it safe.
On his trips throughout the country, Tom Dewey has won the confidence and enthusiastic support of men and women in all walks of life.
Not so much enthusiasm as it turned out. Dewey looked dull, uninspiring, like they said, the little plastic man at the top of the wedding cake. Harry Truman, on the other hand, had nothing to lose. He embarked on a no-holds-barred whistle-stop tour, railing against Republicans in Congress, painting Dewey as standing for nothing.
It does my heart good to see the green fields of this nation once more.
Truman targeted his campaign at farmers, African Americans, white Southerners and Jewish Americans, the very voters who benefited most from Roosevelt's New Deal.
No one is happier with just folks than Mr. Truman.
whose humble country background endowed him with a deep spiritual integrity.
By mid-October, Dewey's margin had closed to 9 points and the final polls had Dewey leading by 5. Despite the tightening race, the last public polls were published 8 days before Election Day. In the end, instead of losing by 5, Truman won by 4, thanks in part to a drop-off in support for Henry Wallace. The polls weren't perfect, they had oversampled Republicans, but the main issue was the lag between when the polls were started, how long the surveys went on for, and when they were published. They were consistently a few weeks behind, as Harry Truman was surging back into contention, and they missed the final stages altogether. In 2020, President Trump is trying an updated version of the Truman strategy, flying to rallies on Air Force One instead of a whistle stop, but the gloves are certainly off, and he's riling up his base, and to an extent, Joe Biden is the one playing it safe, sitting on his lead like Tom Dewey. The question is whether Trump's base is big enough to deliver him 4 more years, and we'll soon see if the polls are missing another comeback.
Finally, a follow-up from last week. We told you how the now cancelled Second Debates moderator Steve Scully publicly tweeted out this attempted private request for advice from Trump hater Anthony Scaramucci. But he then claimed he'd been hacked. Well, that excuse was not designed to last, and this week Scully was placed on indefinite leave after he admitted that he'd lied about the hacking. Well, Trump did a lap of honour for seeing through Scully's clever ruse, but even now, I'm not convinced Steve Scully wasn't hacked. It happens all the time.
We are anonymous. What? Hang on, no.
We are anonymous. Not the hackers called anonymous, we're filming this video anonymously. Obviously. But we are hackers. Special hackers. We hack your social media using software that can do that. Don't worry about the details. We're invisible, like wind in the night. We sneak into the accounts of vaguely recognizable D-list politicians and media figures and only do one small, relatively innocuous thing. We don't send phishing links to make money. We don't boost the value of stocks. We create a single awkward text-based faux pas and then disappear into the ether. Why do we do this? We don't know. What do we get out of it? Nothing. Who do we target? Boomers who don't understand how technology works. You can investigate us, but we're untraceable. It's like we were never there at all. Our hacks are indistinguishable from our victims' behavior. We'll text your ex-boyfriend a love heart emoji. We'll use your credit card to buy a Big Mac meal after Friday night drinks, even though you told your wife you're on a diet. They'll never believe it wasn't you. We are bad. We use extreme techniques. Techniques for computer-based untraceable security evasion. We are bad. Excuse. Beware.
And that's all for Planet America for this week. We will be back at the same time next Wednesday night, and the Wednesday after that, it'll be Planet America's live 2-hour election night spectacular. We've got some great guests for you, lots of analysis and all the very latest election news.
It's getting a little exciting. And we're also going to be back here for a fireside chat on Friday night on ABC News when we will have seen the final debate, including mute button.